me they want to be on time.
Give us 1 second to make sure.
Yeah, I'm one second. I know you were important to talk, but yeah, remember what she said when she got it?
Yeah.
Live stream.
Put pressure on you. Yeah, I know.
You better watch it.
When I'm ready to go, Brian.
Says it's
So depressing.
Okay, we're ready to recording partner.
Okay, you're ready.
Okay, we're ready.
Go ahead.
And Gail is here, right?
Yeah, just making sure we don't.
Is there anybody else there that I need to, that's a member of the planning commission?
Looks like Gail is the only one that's for
Okay, well, that gets us a quorum, so.
Yep.
I'd like to call the, what is today?
Don't look at the
The
agenda.
May 17th, yeah. May 17th meeting, Lacey Planning Commission meeting. I'm looking for approval of the agenda and consent items with the correction on the agenda that should say Tuesday, May 7th.
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it carries. Anybody in the public?
We do have several members of the public. If there's anybody on Zoom that would like to address the planning commission on anything not on tonight's agenda, this is your opportunity to do that. The way to do that is to use the raise hand function of the webinar, and we'll go ahead and bring you in. Anybody has any public comments, just go ahead and hit that raise hand function and we'll bring you in. Going once, twice. I don't see anybody, dude.
Okay, we will move on then. Commission members reports. Gail, anything to report?
No, nothing.
Okay, Eddie?
Nothing.
Daphne?
Nada.
And I have nothing to report also, other than maybe thanking Gail for chairing the meeting last time. Thank you, Gail. Director's report.
Yes, I do have a couple of items kind of work through. Well, let's go first with Ryan. He's going to kind of give a primer on us launching a new online permitting system called Track It next week. So I'll let Ryan kind of talk about that a little bit.
And we've walked through Track It. Grant and I have walked through Track It with the Plan Commission. So Track It is our online permit system, our new permit system, our first new permit system in over 20 years. We were set to go live with it a couple weeks ago. We had a consultant from the company called Central Square that was set to come out that week. Unfortunately, they had a family emergency and weren't able to do that. So our plan is at this point that we'll be going live with Track It starting next week. Next Thursday will be the first day. So we'll have 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of in-house training with our staff. And then going live on Thursday and then Thursday and Friday will be kind of having that same consultant here that's doing the training, doing what they call issue resolution. So that is basically, making sure things work and putting out any fires that may arise after we go live. So we're really excited that this is happening. It'll be our first foray into being able to take credit cards, which I know a lot of the staff will be really happy about. We'll also be able to eventually take ACH payments as well. So that's kind of like an online check. You'll be able to apply for essentially all of our over-the-counter permits online. So we have a web portal. I think we walked through that with you that we'll be able to do over-the-counter permits as well as new single-family residences as well. So that's for us, that's probably about 75% of the permits that we do. For the more complex new commercial projects or residential additions, those things are a little bit more kind of unique. Those will still have to be done at our front counter for the time being, but the idea is at some point they'll be able to go fully online as well for that too. So we're really excited about that, and we'll hope everything goes well next week.
Thank you, Ryan. And I just also want to acknowledge Ryan and Marcy Price in our department, as well as Grant, and the rest of the department and other departments like Public Works that have put all the effort into managing this project, and with everybody else in the staff working on testing it to get it ready for this live event. Oh, this has been a long time in coming. We started working on this upgrade to our system in 2019. We were ready to start the training in person in first quarter of 2020. And of course, the pandemic happened. We had to switch everything over to a virtual environment. And so we had to do all virtual work with the consultants or the vendor. And it's taken some time, but with the perseverance and eye to detail of Marcy and management of Ryan, by Ryan and Grant, we're now finally get to this live stage. So it's really exciting, and hopefully we get a successful launch next week, and then there'll be some bugs to work out, but we'll be right on that with the help of Central Square. So another item I just want to mention is we're going to be starting to do some work with the state. The Washington Department of Transportation contacted us last week and gave us a heads up that they have a direction to start working on addressing the encampments along the I-5 corridor. As you may be aware, the city of Lacey's had an MOU with the DOT on the Slater-Kinney exit on the Lacey side to address the encampments there. And over the last year and a half, we've been very successful with our community resource unit, as well as our mobile outreach team, to have daily interactions, to be able to connect people to services, connect people, back with their families, and slowly work attrition that site down to about 2 current campers, or 0 campers on that site, and 2 campers on that site. Well, we have the remaining encampments along I-5, primarily in the Olympia jurisdiction, that Department of Transportation said they're going to start looking at addressing those. And they're going to address those in partnership with Department of Commerce, who's going to be working on developing a strategy for providing shelter resources and funding, and then also State Patrol, which is going to help with the enforcement and safety aspects. Don't know when that actually is going to start happening, but we are engaged with DOT as well as the governor's office to kind of see if we get a timeline and then be a part of those conversations. Because as you start displacing that individual, if they don't go into services, they're going to filtrate into the communities, and we want to be able to be aware of that and be able to respond with our CRU MOT and provide those resources and that interface. So stay tuned, but I just want to kind of give you the Planning Commission a heads up that this may be happening in the near future, and we'll keep you apprised as we get information. The other items, just because I know the Planning Commission has been tracking these projects, the conditional easement for the Meridian Market and Gas. That is the hearing examiner held a public hearing on that matter and has issued his recommendation. He has recommended to the council approval of the permit with conditions, and council will be taking that up and reviewing that record on June 2nd. Also that night, the council will be also reviewing the hearing examiner's recommendation for the multi-cares proposal for our offsite emergency campus there on Golf Club, Selma, and Pacific Avenue. And the hearing examiner also recommended approval of that proposal with conditions that meet the specifics of our regulations, particularly the firm-based codes for the Midtown area. So that will also be considered by council on June 2nd. So that'll be whoever's going to be attending that meeting, they're going to have a lot to report out on, because it should be a pretty full meeting. And the last thing I want to just give everybody a heads up on is we're getting ready to relaunch our food truck plaza. If you've been driven down Lacey Boulevard or Pacific Avenue by the depot site, you will see that the 5700 building, the old warehouse, is now torn down, and the site's been leveled thanks to the work of the Parks Department as well as Public Works in managing a contract. So now that site is prepared for the future museum site, in the interim, we'll be able to use that site for a more formalized food truck operation. So the first event, Parks is holding a grand opening on the 26th of this month of the actual depot and playground, because it all kind of opened up in the pandemic side, so we're now going to have an official grand opening. And so we're going to bring in about 3 to 4 food trucks for that event. And then those food trucks will stay after the 25th throughout the summer. We have reached out, thanks to Wesley Wynn in our department. He is coordinated with several food trucks. We have 3 that are committed to be there 7 days a week, all day. So now we'll have a more regularity. That includes Lava Bowls, Tacos California, and Bobolastic. And then we also will have other food truck vendors are committed to rotating in and out those other 3 slots. We'll have a total of 6 food truck slots available. And then if there are special events either hosted by the City of Lacey or Parks program, we can also bring additional food trucks into that site for those special events. So we're excited for that to kick off. We'll also include a formal seating area. We'll have some what they call sailcloths or sunshades to be able to put up so they'll be covered over the benches. There will also be a designated parking, so they won't have that conflict where people parking wherever in the food trucks. It'll be a little bit more organized site. And then we also have the ability to put up a stage for special events. So if we have anything like music or anything like that planned, we'll also be able to do that as well. We'll probably have an official grand opening of the food truck sometime in June. And then also too, we have a local market that's been operating in Tumwater, Love's Market. They have interest of holding a market in the Hunterman Park area. And when we found, we've been aware of them and Wesley have reached out and we have working with them to hold a market over at the depot as well, a Sunday market. So once a month during the summer, we'll have potentially a Sunday market. I'll still work out some of the details, but that'll also be bringing more people and more fresh produce. And they typically have 40 to 50 vendors in their public market program. So stay tuned for that. They are for sure having the Thursday night markets once a month at Hunterman Park. And that first market activity is going to be this Thursday, the 19th. So, or I think it's the 19th. Yeah, 19th. So yeah, a lot of good things happening in the Depot District. I hope we bring in lots of people and kind of get more people involved in that area and create that civic presence and neighborhood identity. That concludes my report. Unless there's any questions, anyone of those.
Did you say the grand opening at the depot is the 26th or the 25th?
26.
26th. So
Oh, excuse me. 25th. I'm sorry. You're
you
right.
said both. It's
25th. It's the Wednesday.
Okay.
Some of these I've seen in other towns, they do have alcohol in the evenings and things like that to partner with that. Is there anything that would allow or not allow that in this area?
We don't have any plans for that, but that's something we will take a look at. We do have, because that is a park, it's officially designated as a parks property, so there are park rules. There could be special events or permits for alcohol, but in a general sense, it's not allowed. And so that's something too we want to, if somebody does have a proposal or wants to do something like that, we'll have to look at how we work that in with our current policies and see how it fits.
Okay, anything else?
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. We will now step out of our regular planning commission meeting, and I'd like to open the public hearing for stormwater design manual update. We have Doug Christensen here from Water Resources Engineer for the city. He's the guy that you talk to when you wonder where all that water goes that comes out of the sky. All righty.
Thank you very much. So I've given you a couple of presentations this past few months. I thought tonight I'd just kind of do a verbal summary of what was in the staff report and in those presentations. So basically the City of Lacey's Stormwater Design Manual, or SDM as I call it, regulates stormwater management on new developments, redevelopment projects, and construction sites. It provides design criteria for various best management practices, or BMPs as we call them, for runoff treatment and flow control to protect water quality and prevent flooding. And the SDM is applicable to virtually any land altering activity, public or private, within the city. In fact, ecology's definition of new development starts off with any land disturbing activity. So class 4 forest practices, for example, come under that criteria. Lacey's SDM is based on the Washington Department of Ecology's Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, which provides the baseline minimum requirements, the definitions, the applicability thresholds, the limitations, and the design criteria that are in our manual. So the Lacey's current 2016 SDM has been updated as required to create a 2022 edition of the SDM. Here's what it looks like. I printed a copy today so we can see how thick it is. 970 pages worth. And the reason for this update is for compliance with the 2019 through 2024 Western Washington MPDES Phase 2 Municipal Stormwater Permit, which is the general permit that applies to 80-some jurisdictions in Western Washington. So we're one of many that are updating to meet the requirements of the permit. So that permit's issued by Ecology. The purpose is to regulate discharges from stormwater systems for the primary reason being protection of water quality. So that's what it's all about. So in the permit, specifically section S5C6, which is titled Controlling Runoff from New Development, Redevelopment, and Construction Sites, it requires permittee jurisdictions such as the city of Lacey to implement an ordinance or other enforceable mechanism that addresses runoff from new development, redevelopment, and construction site projects, and to adopt and make effective a local program no later than June 30th, 2022, that meets the requirements specified in the permit. So that's what this is all about. We have a deadline for compliance of June 30th, and we're heading toward that date. So included in that permit section is reference to the requirements, limitations, and criteria in Ecology's 2019 Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. So for equivalency with the manual, we're meeting the permit requirements and the minimum baseline that's in Ecology's updated 2019 manual. So the updates, this 2022 version of the SDM is the third edition of it. We started in 2010. First of all, the first phase 2 permit applied to us starting in 2007. And so we had to update by 2010 under that permit. So we had the 2010 SDM, which was about half this thick. And then in 2016, we had a major update. And now we have the third edition of it. For this update, Ecology specified 9 required, what they called significant changes in their manual for equivalency, plus various other less significant, but still update-worthy changes that they made in their 2019 Western Washington manual. But none of those are as extensive or as impactful as the changes that we had in our 2016 manual, which included really the requirements and full implementation of low impact development techniques. There were updated requirements for flow control standards, especially for really low flows that came into effect in 2016. There were all kinds of new requirements related to infiltration analysis and design. So there were some big changes in 2016. This time around, all of those are already in place, and it's more minor tweaks throughout the manual. And so far as our manual, which is it's a reformatted version of Ecology's manual. It's in a chapter format instead of a volume format. And we've retained that chapter format. We have the core requirements are basically the same. Our submittal requirements have been clarified, they haven't really changed per se, but they've been clarified and formatted better. And then some of the BMPs also are largely the same, but with little adjustments to them and clarifications. The more noteworthy changes were detailed in the staff report, so I'm not going to go through all of those because it gets kind of technical, but those changes were detailed there if you wanted to read those. So far as outreach and process, in late January of this year, the draft red line chapters, meaning the ones that show the changes tracked, was posted on the city website for public review, and that review carried through February, March, and into mid-April, at which time the city's website was, our new website came online and the old one vanished, which I don't think it was supposed to do. But anyway, that kind of marked the end of the public review period because the manual disappeared and I couldn't even find it. So so also along with that, along with the manual posted on the website, there was a 5-page document that summarized the changes. So a person could go through and if they wanted to, could see exactly what the changes were and where they were in the new manual. Public outreach included social media postings, presentation to City Council Utilities Committee, and to the Planning Commission twice. The first time in January was for the kind of the overview of the project and what we were doing. The second time was early February, you may recall, when the public review draft was out for review. And then more recently, I think it was May 4th, we did an online open house webinar / forum to go through and describe the changes. That was a presentation format also. The primary users of the SDM are design engineers for drainage design on development projects, basically. Those are the main users, and internal engineers for city projects. And I made a list of design engineers who've used the manual within the last year or two on at least 1 or 2 projects, and personally contacted them twice during this outreach period. The first time was when the draft was first posted and said, take a look at this and let me know what you think. And if you want to give me a call or an email, we could talk about it, or if you have any questions. The second time was in advance of the webinar so that they could tune into that if they so desired. And I understand that at least one did. So that brings us up to now. Next steps will be that the Utilities Committee are going to get briefed again now that we have a final draft. I'll go through that with them on June 6th, and we're penciled in for City Council on the 16th on the docket. So in summary, this is for compliance with the 2019 through 2024 Municipal Stormwater Permit. It has to be formally adopted by City Council and made effective by no later than June 30th, and would go into effect then on July 1st for new projects and middles that come in. So my request is that you recommend adoption of the manual to the City Council.
And just for clarity, we did not receive any written public comments for the public hearing, nor do we obviously have anybody here at City Hall. We may have some folks in the virtual audience that want to testify.
If you wouldn't mind checking.
No, I can do that for sure. So for those in attendance on Zoom, if you would like to provide any oral comments on the proposed updates to the stormwater design manual, use the raise hand function, and we'll go ahead and promote you to a panelist and bring you in. So this is your opportunity to address the Planning Commission for tonight's public hearing. Give you one more second. Anybody that would like to provide any public testimony, go ahead and use the raise hand function. We'll bring you in. Going once, twice. So I don't see that we have any public testimony tonight.
Thank you very much. Again, Doug, thank you for being so thorough and making things fairly understandable for all of us here on the Planning Commission a number of times. It is appreciated. And so I would like to know if we would like to entertain a motion to move this forward to council.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions from anybody?
I'd just like to second what you said and thank Doug and the staff for,
Yeah.
I mean, I would have had no idea. I still don't know much about the technical stuff. I kind of read through the summaries and even then I was kind of losing myself, but at least I know what the process was and the reason behind it and what we were trying to accomplish. And so I appreciate your guiding us along that way and how thoroughly you did your public outreach. It seems like if anyone is surprised by this that uses it, it's certainly not because you didn't put in the effort. So thank you for that as well.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So move forward to council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. I'm now leaving the public meeting. It is adjourned and heading on back to our regular meeting and opening under new business for Ryan to talk about the Martin Way corridor study.
Let's see if I can promote Katrina here. I can't. Can you promote Katrina to so what we have staff here tonight from Thurston Regional Planning Council that'll give the presentation, so I'll bring them in right now. Doug, you're welcome to take off.
Yeah, this will be interesting.
All right.
Else?
Yeah.
Thanks for offering.
There she is.
Hi, thanks for letting me do this virtually. I appreciate that flexibility. Go ahead and dig in. I'm going to try and be respectful of the time because I've got a very long presentation. So we'll try to hit the high points so we don't take up too much of your evening tonight. And I'm going to share my screen. And please note that I'm working from home right now. And so I'm only going to be able to see my presentation. So if you have a question in the midst of this, please don't hesitate to speak up so that I won't be able to see you otherwise. All right, so Martin Way corridor. This is a project that's been underway since 2019. And so we're just I'm gonna go through some background information, look at Martin Way's past, present, and future. We're gonna look at some alternatives for land use and transportation and talk about a few of our next steps. So this is a multi-jurisdictional project. It's a partnership between Thurston Regional Planning Council, Thurston County, the City of Lacey, Olympia, and Intercity Transit. And the purpose is really to develop a common vision for the Martin Way corridor across those jurisdictions and policies to support that vision as the corridor develops into the future. So we're going to be looking at, or we've been looking at, safety issues, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, transit use, land use, access management, and how driveways impact the function of the roadway and safety of the roadway, as well as neighborhood connectivity. So it's a very long corridor. It's about 7 miles when you look from where Martin Way and Pacific meet all the way out to Deutero. And as I mentioned, we've been at this since 2019, and a lot is going into this project or this study. The ultimate goal is to have an action plan of discrete things that the jurisdictions can do to make the vision for Martin Way come to fruition. Some of the things that have gone into that are going to be feeding into that action plan include the current conditions report that looks at what's happening on the ground today. From a transportation and land use perspective, we went out and asked residents of the corridor, what their thoughts were. We also talked to businesses. We hired a consultant to do a market study to help us understand the market forces at play in how the corridor has developed historically and how it could develop in the future. We hired a second consultant to do a transportation operation assessment. We've done a visual preference survey to understand what people would like to see on Martin Way and how they would like it to look. We backed all of those things up with some additional focus groups with residents, businesses, people who walk and use transit, as well as people who bike. We've held one open house online last year, and we're in the midst of another open house this year that give people an opportunity to provide feedback. And then we're also in the midst of doing a land use and transportation alternatives assessment. And so that's kind of where we are right now. But all of these things, again, are ultimately intended to feed into that action plan and inform how the jurisdictions can move forward with meeting the vision for Martin Way. So when we look at Martin Way in the past, it really is, or was it built as a highway connecting Tacoma and Olympia. So it opened in the 1930s as part of the state highway system, and it was designed to move cars fast and provide a shorter connection between those two communities. And at that time, as you can see in the central picture, it was largely undeveloped with lots of trees, streams, and wetlands. So fast forward to today, and it's very, very different. Over the past 80 years, our region has grown up around Martin Way. It continues to be a critical east-west route that connects Lacey and Olympia, our two largest cities in the county. And it's a lifeline for the region with homes, schools, and major medical center. So since I-5 opened in the 60s, it's no longer the only way to get across town, but many parts of Martin Way still retain that feel of a throughway rather than a place that is part of a community. When we look at residents on the corridor, there's more than 9,000 people who live on or within a quarter mile of Martin Way. There are over 11,000 jobs, so we have a lot of small businesses and major employers on the corridor. We have lots of traffic, lots of vehicle trips, 40,000 a day, and a lot of transit riders. The corridor is one of the more diverse areas of our community. So this just shows you the Martin Way corridor in comparison to Thurston County as a whole, as well as the cities of Lacey and Olympia. And we have transportation issues. I'm sure none of us are surprised by that. So Martin Way is a multimodal transportation corridor where we have people who walk, but there are sidewalk gaps. We have people who bike, but and there is a bicycle lane the entire length of the roadway, but it feels unsafe because you've got fast moving traffic right next to you. In addition to that, we have widely spaced crossings, which lead pedestrians to cross in the middle of the street. And we also have many access points or driveways that lead to some more side collisions. For land use, it's very varied along the corridor. It's a very long stretch of road, and so you see a lot of different things. 80% of the corridor is developed, but it's mostly at low density or intensities. And we have a mix of different residential and commercial types from different eras. Older development lacks some infrastructure and utilities. We have some pretty good sized single family neighborhoods that are right adjacent to the corridor. and they're on septic systems. There is limited vacant land, but there is substantial opportunity for redevelopment. And then finally, we also have 20% of the corridor is actually open space. So forested areas and wetlands, but they're privately held. There aren't improvements that would make it a public access park. And so again, these are areas where you would also see lack of infrastructure and utilities. So as I mentioned earlier, we did go through and hire a consultant to do a market study to help us understand what are the market forces at place. A lot of development is built within a series of prototypes, and the way in which parking is provided, so surface, tuck under, or structured, is a key influence on the physical form of these projects. So typical multifamily housing prototypes are shown below. And development in the Martin Way corridor has been consistent with the two on the left, so townhomes and garden apartments. And what we know from interviews with area developers, there is a momentum in the market towards a Main Street mixed-use development type, but it only comes when there is public funding public funding assistance or incentives that move it towards that side of things. Now that wrap and those mid-rise and podium developments, so those higher intensity or density multifamily developments, are generally not feasible for developers to pursue just based on the market forces at play today. So as part of our outreach to the community, we did ask people what they'd like to see more of on Martin Way. In the realm of the buildings, public amenities was something that people felt was missing and they wanted to see more of. Retail services and restaurants. Martin Way continues to be a place where people access a lot of businesses, offices, and then housing. For the streetscape, people wanted to see those sidewalks completed, as well as better pedestrian crossings and landscaping.
Rena, could I ask, on the public amenities, what kind of things were they talking? Are they like a park, or what were the things people suggested on that?
So for public, that was just one of the options that that person could choose. But yes, it could be a park, it could be a library, it could be a gathering place that isn't necessarily a business where people would want to access. So it could be any of those things.
Thank you.
So from all the information that we gathered through the current conditions report and from what we heard from the community, we identified some key needs. And from that, we developed some goals for the corridor. Some of these are transportation related, some of them are land use. So improving safety for all users in all modes, supporting inclusive growth. So we have a lot of affordable housing on the corridor in one form or another, and that includes a number of manufactured housing parks. And so as there's pressure to redevelop, we need to make sure that people can still afford to live on the corridor. We need to look at balancing the needs of different users. So right now, Martin Way is very much a car-centric, auto-dominated corridor. And so as we try to improve access and meet the needs of people who walk and bike and use transit, there's going to be a shift. There would need to be a shift there in balancing those different needs and priorities. We want to look at increasing connectivity. So because Martin Way can act as a barrier, we've got neighborhoods on both the north and south sides of the roadway that we want to see better connected to creating that community feel. But there's also weak connections when you're talking about people who are bicycling, trying to access those neighborhoods as well. So trying to, again, increase connectivity on a number of fronts. We also want to look at improving continuity. And I'm sure many of us recognize when you change jurisdictions as you're traveling the corridor that the way the corridor looks or behaves is a little different. And so if you're paying attention, you can really see that. And then finally, we want to look at building a sense of place. So Martin Way is very much a place people might travel to shop, but they don't necessarily stay there. And building that sense of community and place is something that creates an environment that is more pedestrian friendly, more bicycle friendly, and more friendly for people who live and work in the area. So let's talk about Martin Way's future. We know that we're going to see a pretty big bump in population regardless of what happens or what any interventions that the jurisdictions put into place. We're going to see more people living here. We're also going to see more people working in the corridor. We're seeing more multifamily developments, and we're also seeing an increase in congestion and conflicts between different modes of travel. So what we know about the existing future regarding transportation is that if we just look at what's planned right now, there's going to be limited changes from today. So there's not, each property is going to redevelop at its own pace, and those improvements are going to be spotty along the corridor. We know that planned improvements that the jurisdictions have already will improve travel for people who are going by car, but we're going to see slower transit times, and we're going to still see those sidewalk gaps. And a couple of the big ones are the Martin Way, the Carpenter Dip, so between I-5 and Carpenter, where you've got those wetlands and those woods and those creeks, and then also one by Ensign Road. And finally, we're going to see unprotected bike lanes. So there aren't improvements planned at this point in time to make a bicyclist feel more comfortable traveling the corridor. For land use, what we'll see is that Martin Way will have a similar look and feel to what it does today. So although we're going to be adding 2,300 new housing units, again, it's going to be spotty along the corridor, and it's not going to be necessarily consistent. We do know that right now, there's about 17% of the housing units along the corridor are affordable for people who make 80% or less of the area's median income. We know that around 230 acres of the corridor are going to redevelop, but we don't anticipate any change to public amenities or green space. So access to parks, access to libraries and other things along the corridor is going to be basically what it is today. And then finally, we're not really going to see any change in engagement. So whether that's from businesses and business associations or residents and residents associations, we're not going to see people treating their sphere as a community or as a neighborhood. So how do we change that? What we know from Sustainable Thurston right now is that we want 72% of urban area housing within half mile of an urban center, corridor, or neighborhood center. And we're not on a trajectory to meet that. So by 2035, if we just do what is already happening, we might get up to about 57%, but we're going to be a far stretch away from that 72%. So when we take all the information that we have from Lacey, Olympia, Thurston County, and Interstate Transit, this is the vision for the corridor, is that it's attractive, that it's a mixed use, high density, that it is easy to walk and bike, that people are still shopping and working and living in the area, and that we are transitioning away from that auto-dominated use to a more pedestrian-friendly streetscape that supports bicycling and high-capacity transportation. So if that's our vision, and what we know at this point in time is that it's going to be difficult to meet that, let's look at some different alternatives for transportation and land use that might help us get there a little bit better. So for performance, we looked at these goals that we have for the corridor and looked at doing some performance measures for transportation and land use. So transportation, we looked at safety, business access. So how do you access the numerous businesses on the corridor? How do you travel by car, bike, bus, and walking? For land use, we looked at housing, just the number of housing units as well as affordability. How visually appealing is the corridor? What are some public spaces and amenities that can be added, and how can we help engage the public in treating where they live or work as part of their community? We looked at 3 transportation alternatives. So 1, minimal improvements that really talk about making very small investments, that low-hanging fruit to improve safety and mobility for people walking and biking. The moderate improvements look at making big investments for improving safety and mobility for people who walk, bike, use transit, and drive. And the mighty improvements bump that up even more so that we're looking again at improving safety and mobility at a greater scale for all those different modes of travel. So when we look at those minimal improvements, that really constitutes painting a buffer, a wider buffer between traffic and the bike lane. It's, again, low-hanging fruit that allows a bicyclist a little bit more comfort next to fast-moving traffic. For the Carpenter Dip, so I-5, between I-5 and Carpenter Road, where there are no sidewalks, establishing a shared use pathway and putting a barrier between traffic and bicyclists and pedestrians. And then finally, looking at driveway consolidation. So this is access management. How can we strategically look at businesses reducing the number of curb cuts and sharing those access points so that we have fewer conflicts when people are turning onto and off of Martin Way? Moderate improvements bump that up a little bit more. So what you would see is 10-foot sidewalks throughout. So where there are sidewalk gaps, those would be filled, and where they're not 10 feet wide, they would be wider or widened to 10 feet. In this case, the cost of doing a sidewalk in that Carpenter Dip is going to be kind of expensive. So in this scenario, we would keep that shared use pathway with a protective barrier. We'd still have, rather than having just a painted buffer for bicyclists, there would be a physical barrier. In this case, if you look at the top left picture, there's a bollard that separates traffic from, or vehicle traffic from bicyclists. We'd also look at adding in mid-block crossings where they're warranted. Again, doing driveway consolidation, and then transferring or converting bus stop pullouts into in-lane stops. And then the mighty improvements look at doing all those things again, but in this case, you know, we would make sure that the sidewalks would be 10 feet throughout the corridor, including in the Carpenter Dip. We'd still look at physically buffering and widening bike lanes and improving crossings and pavement markings. And the big change here is that one of the lanes would be converted to a business access transit lane. So that's where you see this closer to Seattle, where buses are allowed to be in the right-hand lane. It might have a sign that says bus only, but if you're accessing businesses as a driver, you can be in that lane to access the business or to make that left-hand or right-hand turn onto a cross street. So when we look at how these different scenarios stack up, and this is just the cost for, or this just shows what it is for Martin Way and Lacey. In the minimal improvement scenarios, we'll see a little increase in safety bicycling and ease for people bicycling and walking. And that improves with the moderate improvements and then the mighty improvements. But in the mighty improvements, we'll also see a small increase or improvement for people who are using transit. The trade-off is that it will be a little more difficult to travel by car. And when you look at the business access, in the minimal improvements, you're not really going to see much of a change. But in the moderate improvements with those driveway consolidations, you might see people needing to do U-turns for access, especially if they aren't able to make left-hand turns into businesses as easily. For land use, we looked again at 3 different scenarios. 2 of these are nodal in nature, and a node is just an area of concentrated higher density development around an important intersection. So the first scenario, nodal scenario, is affordable housing focused. So really concentrating any land use interventions at those nodes to increase affordable housing. The maximum redevelopment scenario does the same thing, but instead of really concentrating on affordable housing, it says whatever makes sense, makes sense. So if that is commercial development, if it is market rate housing, or if it's affordable housing, all of it can be supported with land use interventions. And the third scenario is corridor-wide continuity. So how do we implement land use interventions that enhance consistency across the corridor, across jurisdictional boundaries? So nodal development, when we looked at the land use alternatives and looking at different methods for intervening in what we know the market can bear and maybe supporting a little bit more, we looked at 4 different nodal points, 2 of them in Olympia and 2 of them in Lacey, Thurston County. The primary node locations for Carpenter was chosen because there is public land owned in that area by the city of Olympia as well as Thurston County. And so it presented a really good opportunity spot for if the jurisdictions wanted to really bump things up or give a demonstration of what we're talking about with the types of development that is desirable, then this would be a good place to demonstrate that. For Ranger Hensley, it's a little bit different because it's, again, very long corridor and a little different types of land uses there, but that would be something a little bit smaller. And so the scenarios that we looked at for nodal development change depending on if we analyze 2 versus 4 of these scenarios. So with regard to land use, we looked at 5 different types of land use tools. And I'm sure we're all very familiar with zoning and development regulations and permitting processes. And realistically, this is the low-hanging fruit. It's the things that are easiest to do. And there are also the things that may not necessarily have the biggest impact in seeing the type of development that is desired. What we heard from the market study was that right now, the jurisdiction's regulations and permitting processes aren't the hindrance. There are other things at play, and it's really about the market forces. And so it's these 3 pieces that are really important if you want to make change happen. So investing in financial tools, civic investments, and public-private partnerships. And so this just gives you a few ideas of different tools that can be used to impact land use on the corridor. So with regard to financial tools, the multifamily tax exemption is essential for some developers in getting the type of development, multifamily development that's desired on the corridor. A newer tool that's open to jurisdictions is tax increment financing. And so that can also benefit or provide a pot of money for a developer to, well, in this case, the jurisdictions to make improvements and then pass that on to the developer to make it easier for them to build the type of development that's desired. Civic investments include placemaking efforts as well as land acquisition. So one thing we learned from the market study is that if land can be provided to a developer at a reduced cost, and you can add strings attached to that to make it the type of development you want, it makes it more financially feasible for them to actually build it. And then finally, public and private partnerships. So a business improvement district, infrastructure improvement fund, and developing those anchor institutions can all help spur the type of development that's desired. So this slide just shows you our anticipated change in housing based on those different scenarios. Where we are today, roughly in 2017 was about 2,700 units of housing. We know that regardless of what we do, regardless of making any interventions, we're going to see growth. And so there's going to be about 5,000 housing units in 2045. But what you see is a really good bump in each of the other three scenarios in housing if there are land use interventions performed that can really increase housing on the corridor. So how do these scenarios stack up against each other? It's a little bit more of a mixed bag, but on the whole, it's pretty positive. So regardless of which scenario you are looking at, other than the no land use changes, we're going to see increases in housing, increases in vibrancy of the corridor, the visual appeal, public space, the development of public spaces, and people's engagement. Where we see a little bit of a miss is with affordability in the maximum redevelopment scenario, as well as the corridor-wide continuity scenario. So those are the two big misses when we look at these land use alternatives. So in general, what we've learned is that through all of this process is that with general market forces, we're not likely to meet that vision of a high density, mixed use, highly walkable, easy to bicycle use transit corridor. It takes some kind of direct intervention to make this vision happen. So things that you can do to create more of a community, focusing at certain locations to build vibrancy, investment, economic activity are good. And the corridor is just really too long. 7 miles is too long to effectively build the vision in an economical way. Now, if the desire there is to see that 7 miles be consistent, if we really do want to put a lot of investment into all these things, you can do it corridor wide. That requires implementation of more tools. So right now we do have an online open house and survey open. It is open through May 31st, and you can access it through the project website, which is trpc.org/Martin-Way. And all of this, once we're through with that, will feed into finishing the alternatives analysis. And then we will move on to taking everything that we've learned and developing that corridor action plan. And so myself, as well as Allison Osterberg and Amy Dixon, they were not able to make it to the meeting tonight. Are part of this, but if you have questions, happy to answer them now. I am also happy to answer it if you have the questions offline. So let me go ahead and shut this down.
Could you leave that? Could you just leave that just a second here? I'm just gonna take a picture so I can.
I've also got Katrina's presentation and I'll email it out to the planning
Oh,
commission
okay,
tomorrow.
that's fine. Thank you.
All right. So I'll stop sharing. That's a lot, but it's a big project. So I'm happy to answer any questions I hopefully can. And if I can't answer, I'll let you know and we'll try and get back to you.
Okay, we have some questions, Daphne.
So I understand the long range vision and some of the costs associated with that, but as I see incremental development, can we agree between all these jurisdictions of like what the 10-foot sidewalks look like, where, you know, and so I'm seeing, even though we have starting this vision of this corridor, we still have piecemeal projects that are doing infrastructure differently along the corridor. Is there any reason we can't agree right now how that will develop? And so then, as you know, if it does become a 25-year plan, we've got some of it already in place, and you know, we'll you know, eventually save money. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And what I would say is that absolutely that is one of the things that is on the table as part of this conversation is, are there ways that strategically make sense for the jurisdictions to match up their regulations? Now, the caveat there is that, as I'm sure you know, is that with the urban growth area, those regulations are Lacey's, but they're controlled or implemented by Thurston County. And there's always going to be a lag between them updating their regulations to match what Lacey is looking for. So that's absolutely something that when you look at that corridor-wide continuity piece is something that we can look at implementing, but there's still going to be issues with it, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense not to do it right.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of a shame.
Isn't that one, hi Katrina, this is Rick. You know, with this project, it's an interjurisdictional project and corridor vision with a lot of community outreach and focus groups and a lot of information going into it. Isn't the idea of this project that once it gets to the adoption stage, then all the jurisdictions will have a common standard, especially for the right-of-way corridor, a common standard to adopt and implement as projects come on. So in essence, there shouldn't be a lag period, because if this is a joint visioning effort and the county's at the table working through this issue, as well as Olympia and Lacey, there should be some continuity going forward once this process is complete. Wouldn't that be right?
I would hope so. But you know, the thing that I keep picturing in my mind is Martin Way in the urban growth area, and how, yeah, there's a good size, I think it might be an 8-foot sidewalk in that area, but their landscape strip is a swale. And so, you know, I see what you're saying is that having that common vision is absolutely a goal, but I just worry that over time, as we move farther and farther away from this project, the interpretations of what it means to have a consistent vision for the corridor might change. So that's probably a little bit of a negative Nelly thought, but I hope that one of the things that pulls out of this is that the jurisdictions can all agree on how, you know, those key pieces of infrastructure should be built and can be done consistently regardless of the boundaries.
Yeah, because it's ultimately going to be either through application of frontage improvements for each parcel that redevelops or develops, or through a corridor project, you know, where it's a publicly funded project where they'll do a large segments. But yeah, that would be our hope too, is that once this process is completed, that there'll be some continuity of application, not only of the regulation, but if a corridor project comes up, that it'll be consistent as well.
Yeah. And I would also say that, you know, we have a steering committee for this project that is made up of staff from both planning and public works from each of the jurisdictions. And so this is the next conversation that we're going to be having with them is, how do we move forward? What makes sense? What are those actions that can be done collectively? What are those actions that have to be done individually?
Can one jurisdiction just take the lead and say, here's what we recommend? Because often it's, you know, if everybody's just like, well, let's start talking about it. Okay, let's start agreeing, and you'll have months and months and years of just kind of all hitting around the issue. But if somebody just steps up and says, this is what we recommend for sidewalks and bike lanes and all of those kinds of things, then it's easier for the other jurisdictions just to adopt and agree versus, you know, all collectively kind of having to, I don't know. So it can like the county
Yeah.
or city just take the lead and make a recommendation and see if we can get the other jurisdictions to follow suit?
Well, I would say that's kind of what we've been doing for the last couple of years. And I would also say that I don't think that the jurisdictions are as far apart as you might think they are. And so finding that common ground should be pretty straightforward. But the mechanism by which you have that common vision or consistency, that's the thing that really needs to be talked through.
Thank you.
Hey, Katrina, I'm just curious, what area of that corridor, just on a personal note, what area of that corridor puts a smile on your face?
Well, I will say I actually love the Carpenter Dip because, it's one of those few areas that is really beautiful. I actually used to live over just past Marvin Road. And so that neighborhood, those neighborhoods by Costco, I love those neighborhoods. And I loved being able to just, pop around the corner onto Martin Way and access some really nice businesses. I love the fact that you've got, Lacey has done a really good job of trying to put action where it needs to be and having those businesses more towards the street front, which helps create a more enticing environment. And so I really appreciate that. If you're talking about the Olympia side of things, I just see so much opportunity there around the Pacific Triangle where Martin Way and Pacific meet up. If you can improve walkability there, people are already living and walking. There are really loved businesses there. And then I think that that's the other thing is that throughout the entire corridor, there are businesses that our community loves. And so, that's been a focus of this as well is trying to make sure that as we look towards the future, we're not negatively impacting those businesses that are really important, both culturally and just economically to our community.
I know that, sorry, Rick. I know that I travel on it probably actually to downtown Olympia. So I actually do the whole corridor because I live out in Jubilee and I start, at one end and go the whole way. It always disturbs me how few crosswalks there are and how many times I literally will stop on Martin Way to let somebody cross the street in the middle of nowhere because it just seems so dangerous. It feels it still feels like the freeway.
It's a barrier. It can absolutely be a barrier for people who are trying to get around on foot.
And they're in wheelchairs and there's a lot of disability problems along that corridor.
Even as a cyclist, I ride everywhere all the time, fearless, have no problem cycling in traffic, but between like Carpenter and probably all the way up to Galaxy, well, even beyond that, but you have to go to the light and do a U-turn and use the pedestrian crosswalk. And if you're on foot, I mean, just to get to that business that's right across the street, that can add a mile to your walk.
Yep.
Either that or you're taking your life in your own hands. So you had mentioned in your presentation mid-block crossings, but is that a concept at this point, or at what point will there be a map where someone will say, we need one here, we need one here, we need one here?
Exactly. So at this point in time, it is very high level and conceptual. So we know that they are needed. Now, doing the analysis of where they are most appropriate would be a next step. So that would probably be part of the action plan, is identifying the specific locations where mid-block crossings make the most sense.
Thank you.
Okay, Rick?
Yeah, a couple more questions, kind of following up on Dave's in that corridor. And what you said, Katrina, too, and some of those nice locations. Trying to get a sense of what the vision is for those various land use scenarios. And I see some recent developments occur out there that to me seem like are kind of going along the lines we're trying to achieve on the corridor. For example, the new intercity transit,
Yeah,
corporate offices, the.
Unity Commons.
You have East Martin Way, which you described, where we have all the multifamily projects around River Ridge, and we've got some more projects coming in. It'd be more urban style mixed use residential, and the how Talon Lane's designed. Would those kind of be the examples that maybe we can look at as potential for the future for the rest of the quarter, and those, especially those key primary and secondary nodes?
Absolutely. I mean, you brought up Unity Commons and Passon facility, but you look at Unity Commons, that provides affordable housing. It provides.
Oh, no.
Oh.
And it provides shelter, overnight shelter, and we lost her.
She comes back. If you get, so, I've been totally involved in this thing as well, so I'm happy to, if you want to keep the conversation going to.
And to follow up on what I think where she was going with Unity Commons is it does provide, it's a pretty supportive housing project that's been developed by an outfit called Lehigh, Low Income Housing Institute. And it also, had some involvement with the city of Olympia with bridging some funding with their home fund to create that. And it was a partnership with Interfaith Works, who also are operating a 60-bed shelter at that location as well. So that's an example of some of that with the transit center and the that project as some public investment to create that civic tone. Then you have the East Martin Way area where you have a lot of developments occurred under the current mixed use high density corridor zoning. It's been established in that corridor for quite some time, that we in the last 8 years we started to see really take hold out in that particular location and area, and with how we've applied those standards out there along River Ridge. So I think those are probably some fairly decent examples of what that corridor can visually become along its entire length. District gets some of the vision aligned between the jurisdictions, as well as the community support for some of these efforts as well. You have a lot of private businesses along that corridor are going to be concerned with some of these improvements and regulation as well. So you have to try to get all that buy-in to you.
Well, I would there are some great local smaller restaurants and things that I think really draw people in for, despite their small locations, that would be nice to preserve. So
She's back.
Sorry about that. Apparently I lost internet connection, so now I'm on my phone. But where were we at? I heard Rick talking about businesses.
Well, I use the community commons and the transit center, some examples of public investments in locations that kind of create that, like you had in the land use scenarios, or the how to implement, I guess. And then also the Martin Way East area, which is a bit more private, but application of standards and regulations and permitting processes. The other question I had, I know this is high level, because we had some of those ways to achieve some of the, the vision, and in there was reference to either tax increment financing, and then also the business improvement district. I know that the business improvement district was also discussed back in years ago in the urban corridor task force recommendations. Has there been at this point any deeper dive in what it takes to kind of use those tools in this corridor, if it's something that really is something that could be how feasible in terms of what it takes to logistics to put something, either one of those projects together?
Yeah, not at this point in time. That would be the next step for us in that action plan. So as part of the open house and some of the background work that we've done, we've identified tools. We've identified some of the issues that might make it harder to use them, as well as some of the benefits to using them. But doing a deeper dive would have to be part of that action plan.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Katrina? Well, we thank you very much for your time and presentation this evening.
yeah, great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you, Katrina.
All right, we will move on to communications, or if there's anything else you guys want to talk on that subject. Okay, move on to communications and announcements. Any communication?
I have an announcement.
Okay,
I just want to remind everybody that this Saturday and Sunday is Lacey Spring Fun Fair at St. Martin's Worthington Center area. On Saturday, the festivities begin at 10 a.m. and on Sunday, they begin at 11 a.m. So want to make sure everybody's tracking that and we can go out and have some fun.
Okay. Any other, I was gonna ask Eddie, have you heard from the transportation policy?
I did. I was not chosen to move forward, so. So I don't have to get up at 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning.
Maybe you got the better of the deal.
Yeah.
All righty, anything? All right, next meeting is June 7th, and I should remind you, there's two, count them, two public hearings at that meeting. So,
6-year transportation improvement program.
yeah, and the 2022 comp plan amendment public hearing. So it'll be on the water system plan, Carpenter Road rezone. If you remember what that is, remember the apartment complex, that thing. And
It's the low density zone.
low density zone consolidated map amendment. So we have two, and the first one, as Rick said, was the 6-year PIP, the tip. You know what they call it, the tip?
The tip,
Yeah, getting the lingo down now.
sometimes they call it the transportation improvement program.
Yeah. But here, we're sophisticated, we call it the tip.
That's right.
Alrighty. At that, adjourned.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.